There's not much that we can do with this box if it remains a standard primitive object. But if we want to edit it further, what we can do is we can convert it to an editable poly. And the way you do that is select an object, right-click anywhere on the screen, and from the quad menu, go all the way down and select Convert to Editable Poly. Now be careful, you have an option to convert to NURBS, Editable Patch, or Editable Mesh, but what we want is the Editable Poly. Once we've done that, we don't see any changes to the model itself, but if we look at the Modify panel now, you can see that we have way more options than we had before. To expand our Modify tab, we can click on its edge and drag it left so that more of our Modify tab is visible and so that we can see more options in our screen at once without having to scroll up or down. In order to explain the basic elements of our model and how we can edit it using the Edit Poly, we first need to explain the basic elements of our 3D mesh. Now, what's a 3D mesh? Well, you can imagine that a 3D mesh is like a shell of a 3D object. This box actually doesn't have anything on its inside. It's totally shallow, and its walls, its shell is infinitely thin. But its shell goes around its entire volume, and so what we see is a box. This mesh or shell that's used to display our 3D object is made up of several different elements. I'm going to press G just to hide my perspective grid for now, and we're going to go through all of these elements one by one. The first of these elements is called a vertex. I'm going to click on this vertex button in the selection box, the selection part of the Modify panel. Now, what is a vertex? A vertex is a point on a 3D mesh. Currently, we have 386 vertices in our specific mesh, and you can see that because if I click and drag over the entire object and go over into the selection box in the Modify panel, we're going to see 386 vertices selected. If I select only one vertex, let's say we select this corner right here, you'll see that it says vertex 90 selected. Now that doesn't mean that we've selected 90 vertices, we've only selected one. But each vertex has a specific ID number. So this one right here in the bottom is vertex 1, this one is vertex 2, so they all have their unique numbers within this mesh. But if we select more than one, or if we select all, you'll see that the number of vertices we've selected is written down here. Next element of our 3D mesh is an edge. An edge is basically a line that connects two vertices. So if we have a vertex right here and a vertex right here, between them we have a line. The next element is called the border, but currently we don't have any borders on this mesh. Because in order for us to have a border, our mesh would have to have an opening somewhere. We're going to create an opening for this mesh in just a little bit, but for now we're going to skip it and move on to our next element, which is a polygon. A polygon is a specific element of a mesh which has at least 3 vertices, in this case it has 4, and at least 3 edges, or in this case 4. Now a polygon can have many different shapes, it can have as many sizes as possible. But when working for game development, it's really good to work with polygons that are 4-sided. They're usually called quads. Now quads are used both in animation and in modeling for video games. and the quads are automatically converted to triangles when they're imported into a video game engine, but you don't need to worry about that for now. What you need to know is that if you're modeling either for animation or for video games, you should try and keep all of your polygons four-sided. As we've started with the box and we've divided it or subdivided it into 8 sections per each side, all of these sections are going to be quads. They're going to be four-sided polygons. The last element in our mesh is an element. And if we select the element selection and click on the object, it's going to select the entire object. But the thing you need to know is that we can actually have more than one object that are physically connected as part of our editable poly. That means that I can have one box, and I'm going to duplicate it by pressing W, holding down Shift, drag it, and I'm going to clone to an element. And now this object, which is basically one object, has two elements, element 1 and element 2. If we go into the Scene Explorer, you can see that we only have one object, and that object is called box 001. We can rename it and call it Edit Polybox. So we only have one object in our scene, but that one object is basically made of two elements. This is one element, and this is another element. Both of these are all part of one object. I'm going to delete this element at this point because I don't actually need it. So I'm just going to click on it, press delete. As you can see, I can delete any specific part, or I can modify any specific independent part of this editable poly. What that means is that I can, for instance, go into the vertex selection mode, select any vertex I want, and I can move it independently of all of the other vertices. I can select more of them if I wish, and again, I can move them to create more elaborate objects. I can do the same thing with an edge. So I'm going to go into the edge selection mode. By clicking on the edge, select any specific edge, and then I can raise it or move it in any direction I want. I can even rotate it to create more complex objects and deformations. I can also select a specific polygon or set of polygons by holding down Control and clicking on more than one polygon, and then I can move them around, scale them, and in this way I can take a relatively simple mesh, which was just a box to begin with, and then modify it more and more until I get a more elaborate shape that can basically be whatever we want. It can be a teacup, it can be a chair, a table, a television set, a robot, a monster. Our imagination and our technical capabilities are the only thing which restrict our creativity. Not only can I select specific elements of this mesh, but I can also delete specific elements of this mesh. And let's say that I want an opening in this mesh for whatever reason. I can go into the polygon selection mode, select these 4 polygons, and then hit delete. Right now, my mesh has a hole right here. And what that means is that we now actually have a border, which means that I can now go into my border selection mode and select it. So as you can see, this is our border. If we want, we can close this border by going into the Modify panel with the border selected and go into the Cap option, which is located underneath the Edit Borders window. And what the Cap option has done is it has closed this hole that we've created. But the thing is that if we look at this polygon right now, it's no longer a quad. We can count how many vertices it has. So one way to do it is we can select the polygon, hold down Control, and click on the Vertex button. What's going to be done is that all of the vertices that this polygon has are going to be selected. And if we go into the selection window in the Modify panel, you'll see that it says 8 vertices selected, which means that this polygon has 8 vertices. Likewise, it has 8 edges, which means that this is not a quad. Even though it looks like a rectangle, it's actually an 8-sided polygon, which is not something that we want to have in our mesh. There are ways to fix it though, but we're going to go in depth with those tools a little bit later on. For now, you can just play around with this model, move it around, try to rescale the edges, try to move them and rotate them, just to see what can be done simply by selecting any element or set of elements, moving them either inwards or outwards, modifying them, just playing around. When we're working in an editable poly, or whichever workflow we're using, we want to streamline our workflow by using shortcuts. A set of shortcuts that we will most often be using when working in the edit poly is the vertex selection, edge selection, border selection, polygon selection, and element selection tool. The shortcuts for those are quite easy to remember. Number 1 on your keyboard enters the vertex selection mode, which means that I can now select vertices. Number 2 goes into the edge selection mode, which means I can select edges. Number 3 goes into the border selection mode. Number 4 goes into the polygon selection. And number 5 enters the element selection tool. To exit any of these tools and go back to the object selection state, just press the same number as the selection type is, which basically means is if we are in the element selection mode, the shortcut for that is 5, I just press 5 again and I'm back into the very simple object state, which means that if I rotate, I'm going to rotate the entire object. If I just want to move or rotate a specific edge, I just press the number 2 on my keyboard and I instantly enter the edge selection mode, and now I can select a specific edge and then move it, twist it, bend it, rescale it, and do whatever I want with it. A couple of other cool features are the following. So if, let's say, I go into my vertex selection by pressing 1 and select this bottom left vertex right here. If I go into the edge selection mode by, let's say, pressing 2 and selecting any specific edge, if I press 1 again, it's going to reselect the vertex that I've initially selected before going into the edge selection mode, which means that each of these selection modes remembers the last selection that I've made. So if I select a number of vertices over here, let's say I go into polygon selection mode by hitting 4 on my keyboard, I can select any specific polygon, and just by pressing 1 again, you can see that these 6 vertices that I've selected just a couple of seconds before are still selected. Another really cool feature is that we can select a specific element, whether it be a vertex, a line, an edge, or a polygon, and then convert that selection to another type of selection. And I'm just going to show you how that works. So let's say I'm going to zoom in that I want to select these 4 vertices. Now I can go into the vertex selection mode by hitting 1 on my keyboard and then clicking on one, holding down Control, clicking on the other, the third, and the fourth. But there is an easier way to do it. So I'm just going to go into the polygon selection mode by hitting 4 on my keyboard. I'm going to select this polygon, and since I want to select the corner vertices of this polygon, I just hold down Control and click on the vertex selection, and now it has converted my selection from the polygon to the vertices that are part of that specific polygon. The same thing can be used to convert a polygon selection to an edge selection. So for instance, if I hit 4 on my keyboard again, I can select, let's say, these 4 polygons. And if I convert this polygon selection to an edge selection, it's going to select all of the edges that these polygons are associated with, which means all of the outside edges and all of the inside edges. So the way I do that is I just hold down Control and click on the edge selection button. And as you can see, we now have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 edges selected as stated here.